Welcome to In My Garden. I'm Hari Berzins, and today we are in Jane Cundiff's garden. Thanks for having us out, Jane.
Well, I'm so glad you could come.
I am too. I am just so happy to be here in your beautiful garden. And we've been chatting before we started rolling this morning about what gardening means to us and how it feels to be a gardener working in the soil. And I'd love for you to share with our viewers, what the garden means to you.
The garden for me is a real connection with nature. I mean, just look at this place that we live in. This is one of the most amazing places in the entire world. And the Appalachian area is third most biodiverse in the entire United States. And we've got it right here in our backyards, and it really is an amazing place. So this deciduous forest here that we're in, and I get to have a garden right in the middle of it and come down every morning, it's heaven. I mean, how could heaven get any better? Mm-hmm. So it's enjoyable.
Yes, I agree. And we were talking about how we are we're right in our garden, this little patch of land just down the hill from your house, and it feels pretty specific, right? But it's so connected to the globe. And
right.
How can you help us to understand how, even though we're just right here on this tiny patch of dirt, that we really are connected globally?
It's every single breath we take. So take a deep breath. When you take that breath and let it out, there are billions times billions of atoms that are coming into your body, and those atoms have been all over the world. And in fact, they've been here since the beginning of the earth. So every single one of those atoms have been inside of dinosaurs, inside of plants, inside of dirt, inside of worms and bugs and your neighbor and Hitler and Einstein. So when we take a deep breath in our garden, we're inhaling everything in the entire earth. And when we let it out, it's going back out there again. So life is this ever-changing interchange between our atoms and the earth. And here in the garden, you pay attention to the breath because the weather really affects the garden. Mm-hmm. And you pay attention to the rain because every drop we drink, we depend upon rain. Mm-hmm. And we depend upon nature to clean that rain. And so the gardens and every bite we eat comes from the earth. Mm-hmm. And so this interchange, this global interchange. So when we take a bite of just this little dill plant here, that's got atoms from all over the world inside of it too. And it becomes us. And so the world becomes us and we become the world. And there really is that interchange. And in the garden, you're constantly reminded of that because you're constantly connected to nature.
Well, I really feel that when I'm in the garden, just that connectedness to everything. And during the pandemic, making this show has really, forced Fox and I to get out in the garden just because we're creating a garden show. And it's really been helpful for my mental health. And so I can feel what you're talking about for sure. And I was thinking as you were talking that you really sound like a teacher, and I know you are, and I'd like you to share with our viewers a bit about your background.
Well, I've been teaching since I was a child and was the oldest of 6 kids, but I became a teacher quite a few years ago. I'd been in science research for a while and got bored with it because it was just, you do the same thing over and over, and then I was asked to teach and found that I could learn a lot more being a teacher. And that's what I loved about it. And I really loved it and got into it, I think in 1987 or something like that. And then my husband and he became a teacher too because he saw I loved it so much. And we went overseas and we've taught in 7 different countries around the globe. And we did that from 1987 till 2008. And then we came back here and we're teaching at Radford University now, still part-time. And he's there right today, actually, doing some work on a video, getting ready for his classes. But I worked with some of the very first people who wrote the original textbooks in environmental science. And from that time, and I was there at University of Florida helping to create the very first Earth Day that was held there. So I've always been just so in touch with the environment in all around the globe, and really looking at things from different perspectives, and then just wanting to share that with everybody.
Yes, your passion really comes through, and I've always admired that about you. Just really, teaching through example, through living, and I think that's wonderful. So standing here in your garden, I had no idea you were part of the first Earth Day. That's really cool. So thank you again for having us. So we're gardening in Zone 6B, and we're in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Appalachia. And I know that makes us a little different in what we need to do in the garden and just our environment around us. And so can you kind of highlight what's special about gardening here?
Yes, this is a very special place, and we're so lucky to be living here because the soil itself is part of the Appalachian biome. So Appalachia is a deciduous forest, and you can see that all around us. And the only reason there's any cleared land here is because it was cleared 25, 30 years ago before we bought this place. But that forest biome tells us something about what might grow here, and what is going to do well and what's not going to do well. There's a whole diversity of creatures here, and everybody knows what deer do to our gardens, and bear, and raccoons, and all kinds of things. And so we have to build fences to keep them out, and we have to do things that help us to live in this biome and do the garden in the biome and still be in tune with nature, not killing all of our critters, as much as we can, live in harmony with that. Because this web of life that we live in is so important to keep it healthy. So we can't just kill off some species. As we kill off different species, it's sort of like taking little chunks out of our body. If you took just one little tiny chunk out of your body, would you feel it?
Probably.
It depends upon where that chunk was.
Yeah.
But if you just kept taking little chunks out of your body, what would happen?
Well, you might die.
Yeah, exactly. And the same is true of our global ecosystem and even our local ecosystem. If we destroy different parts of it and continue to destroy it, we won't know what kills us in the end. Mm-hmm. But it's that constant killing things that keep us alive. It's that constant web of life we have become so disconnected with. So living here in Appalachia, we see this web of life that's so important. In fact, our forests produce so much oxygen for the world. That oxygen is important, and of course there's CO2 absorption. So if you look up at these trees, any of these trees, look how tall those trees are. And you can see how much oxygen they might give out, how much carbon dioxide they might take in, compared to this grass right here. Now look at that grass. Can you figure out how much that would take in and give out compared to those trees? Mm-hmm. And so the Appalachian biome is an important part and forest around the world for giving us that oxygen for every breath we take, for all the organisms in that web that keep that tree alive. So there's all these things, and when we build a garden, we want to be as much in tune with that as we can. We want to keep the butterflies here, so we bring, and the bees and everything that helps those trees, we want to help keep them in our gardens as well.
So I've been asked several times, what percentage of your food do you grow? And I don't know. I can't answer that question. I know it's a good amount in certain times of the year, and I certainly freeze a lot and can a lot and do what I can. But I'm actually curious what you would say to how you feel that it impacts our footprint on the earth.
Right. Yeah, and our footprint is far bigger than we ever really realize. We like to blame it on somebody else, on the factories or something like that. But it's my feet, it's my shoes that I buy at the factory, it's all those things. But the garden is really important, not just for your own peace of mind and your own health, which is really good, but it impacts it in all kinds of ways you don't even think about. And one of the most important ways is actually drinking. Because we drink, we buy these drinks, cases of Cokes or something like that. But if you think about it, I think I did the math once, and if over like 50 years in a lifetime, you'd buy like 100,000 cans. So,
yes.
I mean, it's really incredibly large number. But here in the garden, I've got lots of herbs growing. And so right over here, I've got anise hyssop, and I've got mint, and I've got right here is some tulsi, some holy basil. And these plants, I can just take a little chunk of them, and I can squeeze them up and toss them into my glass of water, and I have a drink. And I have one glass that I bought 25 years ago, and I have my drink that's really healthy for me, and I've grown it right here. I haven't driven anywhere. I haven't used any factories at all. So even if your garden's tiny, even if you've just got buckets of herbs on your back porch, every time you just take that little bit and put it in your glass, you're reducing the factories that have to produce the cans that make the drinks. You're reducing the trucks that have to ship it to you. You're reducing the ships that have to bring it across the world lots of times, and all kinds of impacts that have been hidden from us. We just think, oh, it's just right there in front of us, no problem, we just drink it. But the impacts are far greater, and it's why we have a global problem. It's not so much that there are 7.5 billion people, which is really a problem in itself, but it's that we are using too many factories when we could just be getting things from our own backyards. And as far, like I said, as far as growing all you can use, well, no way. I don't grow my own olives, so why not use olive oils?
Right.
So, but again, even just little back porch gardens can provide a lot of things for you and the environment.
Yes. Thank you. It is very rewarding to have that glass of mint water or whatever and know that you didn't use a can and I don't think about that a lot. So thank you for pointing that out. That makes me feel even better. But you know what? It's just delicious. Like that's the main thing to me. It just tastes so good, and it's rewarding because it was my hands that cultivated the soil around that mint, and that's what's so rewarding.
It is, and it feels really good because it's so healthy for us. We evolved on this planet eating herbs right outside our backyards, and they're right out here in nature. There's a lot of wild herbs in this area, so you don't even have to grow a garden to have your own herbal teas. Blackberry leaves make amazing tea. And so in fact, they're actually used in celestial seasonings teas. So blackberry leaves, there's a lot of different other wild herbs, and of course there's wild mints, all kinds of things from the mint family that are good in tea. And so I make what I call garden tea, which I know you've had before at the garden club. But basically it's whatever's growing in season, and it just makes you feel so connected to the earth to do that. And it's free, and no factories and no trucks involved in that.
So garden tea is just whatever is growing thrown together.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I'm gonna have to
I have
make
some up at the house. I'll give you some later.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, that's a great idea. So do you clip it all, dry it, and then mix it together?
No, it's not so hard. Just like I showed you, just a squish in water is the easiest thing you can do. But what I usually do when it's in season is I just gather it all together and I put boiling water over it and let it steep for 2 days. And that really gets all the herb nutrition enzymes, a lot more out of the tea, so that when you drink it, it just really feels wonderful. And but for winter, I do dry the extra herbs I have. I dry those for winter. Sometimes I just freeze them. I stuff them in a Ziploc bag and stick them in the freezer.
Just freeze them right away.
I just freeze them right away. I take off the stems when I freeze them so they're not so bulky. But basically, it's really easy, and it's totally free, and it's wonderful nutrition all year long. You've heard that leafy greens are so healthy. They're one of the healthiest foods that you can drink is leafy greens. And so making a garden tea is just that. And it's wonderful.
Yet more uses for all those greens out in the garden. So I'm trying to use what I grow. It's so easy to not it's just so time consuming a lot of times to take advantage of everything that's growing.
Yeah.
And so the more ideas, the better.
Right. And in fact, you said using the greens, but most of them that you use the greens from, you can also use the flowers.
Okay.
And so I pick, like this time of year, I have the tulsi and it's flowering, but the flower's just fine. So I use the whole, in fact, and the stems are pretty small on that. So I just cut them and put the whole thing in the tea.
I'm going to make some this afternoon.
Oh, good.
So will you show us around? I'd love a tour of your garden.
Okay, well, you want to start at one end and go to the other? Or?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
We believe that food and community go hand in hand. Yet family farms are slowly disappearing from this country, taking with them a piece of community. We are here to counteract that trend. Since 1892, the Slusher family has farmed the land along Rush Fork Creek in Floyd County, where Fields Edge Farm operates today. At Fields Edge, we dream of a world where the phrase local food means food grown by your friends, your neighbors, and in your own backyard. We dream of bringing back the family farm, or at least the family garden, so neighbors and friends can share seed, produce, stories, and food with each other and keep a piece of community alive. We know we aren't the only ones with this dream. Join us for the Fields Ed workshops and have a working farm as your classroom to learn to successfully grow your own produce and develop the skills to take your garden as far as you can dream.
One of the things you have to do with the garden around here is, because this is such a biodiverse place, is it's filled with critters that want to eat the same thing you do. And so it took us years to finally figure out this fence that keeps everything out. I mean, this past couple of years, we've gotten our food without sharing except with the birds. So basically, we've got this welded wire here that's 2x4. Well, the rabbits could get under that, and the all kinds of animals, the skunks would get right under it. And so we put this chicken wire. It's a 3-foot chicken wire. It's 2 foot on the side and folded down and down. We put that in the winter time, and then in the summertime the grass goes right through it, and you can still mow right over the top of it. But you want this thick growth under your fence, because that helps defer the animals as well. So we've got this that keeps all the low animals in, and then we've got this that keeps, if they happen to get above it, it'll stop the bigger animals. But then we've got the electric wire for those that wanted to climb over. So and it's solar powered down here, down the mountain, and it's just a couple inches above this to catch them. And then we have to worry, of course, about the deer jumping over. On this side, we're not so worried because this is a steep hill there, and so they really, can't get a good running jump there. But on the ends of the garden, we've got the wire up another, 1.5 feet or so from the fence, and we have not had any trouble with the deer. But fencing is if you want to get what's in your garden, there's one thing by living with nature, and there's another thing about, this is mine, this is yours.
Exactly.
We want to fence it.
Well, yes. So we protect what we're growing, and then tell us what we are growing.
Okay, so I focus when I grow on a couple of different things. I focus on foods that will store a long time through the winter. In fact, I still have some sweet potatoes from last year. So I have sweet potatoes that I grow on that end of the garden. I grow them different places every year. But I grow the sweet potatoes, and then these are winter squash. Most of them right here is summer squash, but that's all butternut squash. And I grow them on the side of the garden where they can climb up the fence. And so those, I think there's like 28 mounds of winter squash. And so I think I finished my last butternut just a few days ago, and there's flowers on this one already. So butternut squash, sweet potatoes, and garlic, which I just harvested 2 days ago. And those are my winter crops that are so easy to store on a shelf in a cool room. So I've got that. And then I look at nutrition. And so for nutrition, I focus on greens. And my greens garden is up at the top of the hill because it's more shady there. So greens can take a lot of shade, and kale is my favorite because it gets big and it's really healthy. So I grow a lot of kale, and I chop it up and freeze it in Ziploc bags for the winter, so I have plenty all year long. And then the other thing is berries. Berries are so nutritious, and so I have blueberries and raspberries more up in the hill gardens. So this is mostly my vegetable garden, and it's a lot of herbs and flowers. The flowers are here a lot to bring in pollinators, and because they're beautiful, and it makes it just lovely to be in the garden. But I also, like these are calendula flowers here. And calendula is a herb so I just harvested some of these flowers yesterday. But they're a flower that's a good herb, and it's supposed to be good to calm the nerves. And you just use the flowers. And so I've got some of those drying at the top of the hill.
And do you make something like a tea, or how are you using the flowers?
I use them in tea.
Okay.
And so, so I will dry these, or I'll use some of the fresh ones and just in my fresh garden tea. But yeah, I will dry them, and they're pretty just sitting on the kitchen counter to dry. And then these are my cucumbers. Now, you're always going to have failures in a garden.
Yeah.
And talking about living with the environment, cucumbers and melons don't do all that great in this heavy clay soil. And so this is actually, and they hate cold weather. This is the third time I've planted those cucumbers. they're finally coming up out of the ground, and but it's because we had such a cool, wet spring. They did not like that.
Yeah.
So so other things did. The kale, just loved it. I think I've had at least 4 different harvests already from my kale this year.
And I see some peppers. What kind of peppers are you growing?
Yes, peppers is another thing to grow for good nutrition. Peppers and tomatoes, and the tomatoes are right there. And I've got 4 different kinds of peppers in the garden for different reasons. This is a new variety I tried last year. It's called Jaworski. It's like AGV. It's some really weird name, but it's Jaworski peppers. I got them from Baker Creek Seeds. And they're really big, and they're really red, and they're just delicious.
Are they sweet?
Yes, they're sweet red pepper. And and I never liked bell peppers all that much. They just don't have that much flavor to them. And but I love these, and they did real well. So I saved the seeds, and I'm growing them here. So I keep the ones that I want to save the seeds from separate from the other ones. So I've got other peppers growing down the way for different reasons.
And explain to us about why separating them for saving seeds.
For saving seeds, we grow things for pollinators, and almost all of our vegetables are pollinated by insects, which is why we really need to keep our insects, and we really need to track them and let them multiply. See, there's little, already you can see tiny bees flying around these little flowers here. And of course they love the sunflowers, and so do all the butterflies. But because of our peppers and our tomatoes and most of our seeds, our butternut squash, will lovely share their pollen with a closely related plant. And then the seeds will be basically a cross between who knows what in your garden. So you want to keep them separate as much as possible. So I've got, my Jaworski peppers here, and I've got banana peppers and hot peppers way down the other side of the garden. I've got one type of tomato here. I've got other types of tomatoes down the garden.
Now, if you're not worried about saving seed, then it's not so important.
No, it doesn't matter at all.
Okay. It's the seed that will be the cross, not the actual vegetable.
Exactly.
Okay. So then you've got your peppers and tomatoes near each other. Is there a reason for that?
It just happens to be the way I want that they came
just
out.
Happened. Okay.
Because every year I have to kind of reshuffle who grows where, and because I've got so many peppers, it's kind of figure out where am I going to put them this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, they talk about companion planting and things that do well or don't do well next to each other. I don't seem to see much difference in it, so I tried to keep them separate enough so they get the nutrients they need.
Right. Well, so we've got all our squash. Maybe we go on this side?
Yeah, let's go around this side. Here's my snow peas that do well on the fence.
That's great. They're still producing.
Yeah, they're still producing.
Yeah.
They're
awesome.
But the fences are really important to use productively in your garden too. So I use these, and as I said, those squash over there will be growing up that fence line. And this fence line here is right in the middle of the garden, and I've got a couple of these in the middle of the garden so that I can tie tomatoes to them and grow pole beans on them. And so those two things, and I'm probably going to put in another one of these fences next year, because they're really helpful in a garden.
Yeah, definitely nice to have some structure.
Yes. This is just a tiny bit of kale here because those were the plants I had left over. The rest of my kale is at the top, so I grow a ton of kale. And I grow corn because it tastes good, but it really does take a lot of space in a garden.
And how do you do with the little worms that get into the corn, the ears of corn?
I really, luckily, have not had trouble with that yet. And it could be because I foster birds so much. So all of my pollinator all those little insects also attracts birds. And also because I have forest on all these sides. So I do get a lot of birds here, and I haven't had too much trouble yet.
Because the birds would then maybe eat the little worms.
They would eat the bugs, yeah. But as you can see, the white moths, the cabbage moths have been here on the cabbage. But one thing I do in a garden too is I plant far more than I think I'll need. I really don't eat that much cabbage, but I make sauerkraut. And so out of this, I'm going to get some cabbage.
You're sharing. You're happy to share.
Exactly. And as an organic gardener, basically you're going to have to share. And so, you know more than anybody. Those bugs come in and they really they
now,
want to
this
share.
year, the cabbage loopers came late. Did you notice that?
Yes, in fact, a lot of things came late, and so we had an extended, long, cool spring.
Yeah.
And in fact, now we're just now seeing the lightning bugs come out. And so they came out really late, and the butterflies really haven't come out yet, and I'm a little concerned about that. Come on, we're ready.
We'd like to see you flutter around.
That's right. But we've got the bee balm here, and that attracts. We do have a lot of native bees here. And so it's not just the honeybees, of course they are important too, but it's all the little teeny critters, and you can kind of see them fluttering around through here. And I like to feed them throughout all the seasons. And so very early spring, you want to make sure that whatever flowers that come out first. So this good old little fleabane here that is a common weed comes out pretty early, and the bees like it. And so I like it too. It's pretty. So, I let some of these weeds grow up in the garden because they feed our native pollinators. And that's really important.
I noticed that dandelion is one of the first things.
Exactly.
And, where I grew up, suburbia, everybody's trying to get rid of dandelions. I don't understand it.
Yeah, and that's a sad thing, and is that that's part of the disconnection with nature. We've seen on the advertisements, kill the dandelions, and we pay attention to that instead of loving nature and getting more in touch with it and realizing how important all these wildflowers are. And you can see out at the end of the garden, or in both ends of the garden, basically there's huge expanses of secondary growth. So this whole area was mowed or cut down, stripped with bulldozers as an airstrip about 40 years ago, long before we bought the property. And the plants we have kept it in secondary succession, which means that the plants on the side we allow to grow up. And now you can see just the mowed part there, but over on the side you can see the wildflowers. And so we keep the wildflowers growing, but we mow it once a year to keep it from growing back into forest. And so, we took what we had, we keep it partially natural in secondary succession, but this is what's really natural is the forest itself. Yeah. And for us as humans to live here, we need our garden space. Down there we also have planted rows and rows of fruit and nut trees.
Oh, wow.
And so it will be for us and nature that we try to live in harmony. So the whole thing about our gardens and about the global perspective is we have forgotten how to live in harmony with nature. And that's so important because you know how harmony makes you feel.
Yeah.
It makes you feel good. It makes everything feel good. And these trees have lives. These bushes and flowers all have lives. In fact, their DNA is at more than 50% the same as ours. So people, who knows about their consciousness just because we can't speak their language?
Yeah.
So our whole perspective needs to change back and get more in harmony with nature. And a garden is the best place to start with that.
You really feel it. I was just admiring the bee balm and how, what's it called again? is that bee balm?
It's bee balm.
Okay. Is this a perennial?
Yes, it's a perennial. So actually right here in the center of my garden, I have a lot of perennials planted. There's some annuals too, but I'm extending that and making, I try to keep the perennials in one spot so when I till in early
leave this
spring,
area
I
alone.
can, I don't have to wander around the garden. But I have a lot of perennial herbs here, and of course they're the first things that pop up in spring, and that's a good thing to bring in the pollinators as well.
So when would you dig a perennial out to move it? Like say you wanted some of that in your other garden.
Yeah, it depends upon the perennial itself. Bee balm and a lot of the mint family are really tough. You can dig them anytime and plant them anywhere as long as you give them water.
Okay.
So the mint family is really good, and most of them in our teas, and just giving them lots of water is important. So you could do that now. A good time to plant is fall, but a lot of times by fall, you can't find the plant.
Yeah, so you need to do it when you know what you're moving.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You have to, whatever you transplant at any time of the year, you have to recognize it's a living being. It's going to go into a new place. It needs some tender, loving care until it gets really established.
Yeah.
So you want to move further down here in the garden. You can see here's another fence I have established with a different kind of tomatoes on it. And the morning glories, now the morning glories, I love them because they're beautiful. And they can start to take over. I probably let too many of them grow there over the top of my tomatoes. But the thing about, a lot of people say, oh, this is going to take over or that's going to take over. I say, oh, what are you a gardener for? Just pull them out. It's not that big a deal. If I wanted to pull out that plant, it's not going to come and attack me. It's fine. And so I like to have some of those. I love my volunteer plants. They pop up all kinds of places, and some places I just love to see them. So they make you smile when you come into the garden. And when you're smiling, you're a better gardener.
Yeah. They're the determined ones, you figure,
Yeah, exactly.
They grew all by themselves. Yeah.
And the sunflowers too. I didn't plant any of these sunflowers this year. They all came back.
I love volunteer sunflowers.
Yeah, they came back. And this is another thing about replanting. My sunflowers came up all over the garden in spring. And so when they were just, a few inches high, I moved them all into clumps so that I would know where they were and could garden around them. So there's another pepper. So you can see how distant it is from the pepper that's down there. And that's kind of a sweet Hungarian pepper, it's called. And then I've got my potatoes. Now potatoes are getting sort of they did really well this year. They got huge and really green. Lots of things did well this year because of all the rain and the extra CO2. They love CO2.
And where were we getting that from?
So as you know, the CO2 is in excess because we're burning fossil fuels and have been doing that for a very long time, and it's cumulative. And the thing that's a little scary about it is that we wouldn't have to worry about it if the plants were all taking it up, but we're cutting down the forest. And so if all our forests were still here, we'd have really good forests and lots of really green gardens. So CO2 it's really important on a global basis to protect all of our trees, which are very important. And I haven't cut any trees for this garden. In fact, I've planted more. So these trees here on the side are all fruit and nut trees. So this is the north side of my garden. So the north side doesn't, it's not going to shade all the way over here. And so that north side of the garden, I've planted fruit and nut trees, and I've also put the fence on the other side of them as well. So that protects it protected the deer from eating the whole tree when they were small. So that kind of thing too, looking at your garden, how it fits in with nature. You want to look at north, south, east, and west. You want to know how much water can you get to it. You're going to have to water your garden in times of drought. And when this garden is 100 feet in elevation different from my house, and I didn't want to dig a well down here, but one day we looked up and said, 700 foot of hose will do it. So we have 700 foot of hose down to the garden, and we can water this when necessary. So here's my poppies, and there's just, I think this is one petal left from the poppy plant, but they're so beautiful in early spring, and the bees adore them. Every poppy's got like 4 or 5 bees inside of it in spring. And of course, those are staying there until they start producing seed. And right now they're already browning up a little bit, so the seed is maturing inside the plant. And this plant right here, this is an interesting plant. This is lamb squatters, if you know it. It's a wild plant, and it comes heavily in my manure, the cow manure that I get. The seed does, because cows love to eat it too. But I kind of cultivate it in my garden. So I watch where it pops up, and I save a few places where I want it to grow, and then I use it as a green. It's actually, I think, tastes better than spinach. And it's way easier to grow. And it's big.
It wants to grow.
It wants to grow. And notice how late it is in the season. It grows pretty well and through summer. And you can still get good greens from that. So lamb squatters is another way of living with your environment. You can find it out in nature. It's a local weed. Oh, and you can also add different kinds of greens like this to your tea. It adds that leafy green taste, and also that nutrition that you get from leafy greens. Brussels sprouts, I grow them every year because I love Brussels sprouts. Sometimes I get some, sometimes I don't. It's the cabbage loopers that usually get to them. But they're doing pretty well this year. They got quite a head start because all the greens grew well before the cabbage loopers came in. So I think we'll do well there. There's all the sweet potatoes back there. I think I have, 38 or 40 sweet potato plants that I started, and I'll get boxes of those. They actually store quite a bit better than white potatoes, and they're more nutritious. So they're quite tasty. And then at the very end of the garden, again on the fence line, I've got another set of tomatoes. These are cherry tomatoes, and cherry tomatoes really are one of the best tomatoes to grow because they don't get very many diseases, and they're easy to care for and very prolific.
And they will reseed every year.
They do. They can reseed, but I never count on things reseeding. I always love the volunteers, but I usually start most of my plants. I start in the house, except for the really big seeded ones.
So how much time do you spend down here on average?
As much as I can. Actually, to keep the garden growing, I like to come down for between an hour to 2 hours every morning, and then I usually stop by in the evening, just when we take the dogs out for a walk, to see how it's doing, if something needs watering or something like that. So it doesn't take all that much time. Sometimes in the spring, when I really want to get out in the garden, I might be out here most of the day.
Yeah.
So it's
a lot more time in the spring, and then like this time of year, it seems to sort of taper off a little, but then if you're going to do a fall crop, it's time to get back at it.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't do many fall crops because basically I started my gardening in Florida and actually have a degree in agriculture, but it's I went a different direction with that, but it was so hot in August. I just learned not to do gardening in August. But I do have a lot of harvesting still going on with all my winter crops here. And I have all my kales already stored in the freezer, so I don't grow it for a winter crop.
Well, thank you so much for giving us a tour and for sharing your perspective on gardening in the greater world. It's very refreshing and inspiring to be here with you.
Well, great. I'm so glad you could come.